The air in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Dender was thick with the suffocating opulence of New York's financial royalty. It smelled of hothouse lilies, expensive perfume, and the faint, metallic scent of money-changing hands under the guise of philanthropy. The low hum of conversation was a symphony of fortunes being made and reputations being unmade. A delicate dance of power played out beneath the watchful eyes of ancient Egyptian gods. Alara Vance moved through it all with the practiced invisibility of the help, her simple black uniform a stark contrast to the glittering gowns and bespoke tuxedos that surrounded her. As a junior event coordinator for a high-end catering company, she was a ghost, a pair of hands meant to refill champagne flutes and clear canapé trays. And that was exactly how she wanted it. For now. Her eyes, a cool and steady gray, scanned the crowd, bypassing the clusters of socialites and tech billionaires until they found him. Julian Thorne. He stood near the reflecting pool, the temple's grand sandstone archway framing him like a modern-day pharaoh. CEO of Thorne Capital, a titan of private equity. He held court with an effortless arrogance, his laughter sharp and confident as he charmed a senator and his wife. He was everything she remembered: the perfectly tailored suit, the glint of a Patek Philippe at his wrist, the predatory smile that never quite reached his eyes. Alara's heart hammered a slow, controlled rhythm against her ribs. This was her third event working for this company, a position she had meticulously researched and secured for one reason: it was Thorne's preferred caterer for all his corporate and personal affairs. It was a foothold, a way inside the fortress. She picked up a fresh tray of champagne, the crystal flutes catching the light like captured stars. With practiced ease, she navigated the throng, her movements fluid and economical. As she approached Thorne's group, she kept her eyes downcast, her expression professionally placid. "Senator, the truth is, risk is just another commodity," Thorne was saying, his voice a smooth baritone that carried over the murmur of the gala. "You just have to know how to package it." He turned, gesturing with his hand, and his gaze fell upon Alara. For a fraction of a second, his smile faltered. A flicker of recognition, faint but undeniable, crossed his features. He saw not the uniform, but the face, the Vance face. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement of a history he had buried under 2 decades of ruthless success. Alara met his gaze for a single, charged second before lowering her own, offering the tray. Champagne. The senator reached for a glass, but Thorne held up a hand, a smirk playing on his lips. "Allow me." He took a flute, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was like an electric shock, cold and sharp. Instead of moving away, he pivoted slightly, his body angling hers toward a small, priceless Ptolemaic statuette displayed on a nearby pedestal. It happened in a blur of calculated carelessness. His elbow nudged the back of her tray. The delicate balance shifted, the flutes tilted, a cascade of crystal and golden liquid crashing onto the marble floor and splashing across the base of the ancient artifact. Gasps rippled through the surrounding guests. The low hum of conversation died, replaced by a tense, immediate silence. Security guards moved forward, their faces grim. A museum curator rushed over, her expression horrified. "Oh, my goodness," Thorne said, his voice laced with a theatrical disappointment. He looked down at the mess, then at Alara, his eyes filled with a cold, performative pity. "How clumsy. You have to be more careful in a place like this." He hadn't touched her. He hadn't pushed. To every observer, it was a simple, unfortunate accident caused by an overworked event staffer. But Alara knew. She had felt the precise, deliberate pressure of his arm guiding the fall. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. It was a reassertion of dominance, a reminder of her place in his world. Her supervisor, a frantic woman named Maria, rushed to her side. "I am so sorry. Mr. Thorne. So sorry. Everyone." She grabbed Alara's arm, her grip tight with panic. "What were you thinking?" Alara remained perfectly still, her gaze locked on Thorne. She didn't flinch, didn't cry out, didn't offer a single word of defense. Her composure was absolute, an unnerving calm in the eye of a storm he had created. Thorne leaned in closer, his voice a low whisper meant only for her. "Some people are just destined to clean up the messes others make." He paused, letting the words sink in, his eyes glinting with a cruel, private amusement. "It's in the blood, isn't it, Vance?" In the blood. The phrase was a key, unlocking a vault of memory she kept buried deep within her. The world of suffocating opulence dissolved, replaced by the sterile, antiseptic smell of a hospital waiting room. She was 10 years old again, her small hand clutching her mother's, the fabric of her dress damp with her father's tears. Robert Vance, a man who had built a construction empire on handshakes and integrity, was a broken shell, his face ashen, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He kept repeating the same words over and over, a mantra of disbelief and betrayal. He took everything. Catherine, Julian. He took it all. Her father's company, Vance Construction, had been forced into bankruptcy after their partner, Thorne Capital, had abruptly called in a series of predatory loans, backed by documents her father swore were forgeries. Their family home, their savings, their future, all gone in the space of a week. The stress had triggered a massive stroke, leaving her father a shadow of the man he was, his body and spirit shattered. The mess. Julian had made the mess, and her family had been left to clean up the ruins. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. The hurt, the grief, the righteous anger of a child had, over the years, been forged into something far more dangerous purpose. She looked at Julian Thorne, truly looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not a victim, but an equal. Her calm was not submission, it was control. Her silence was not fear, it was a vow. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "It is." She then turned to the horrified curator, her professionalism a flawless mask. "Please accept my sincerest apologies. I will, of course, cover any and all costs for the cleaning and inspection of the artifact." She met her supervisor's panicked gaze with the same unnerving serenity. "Maria, please deduct it from my pay. I'll handle the cleanup myself." As she knelt, carefully picking up the shards of broken crystal, she could feel Thorne's eyes on her. He had expected tears, an outburst, a satisfying crumble of a long-vanquished foe. He had not expected this chilling composure. He had meant to humiliate her, to remind her of her powerlessness. Instead, he had confirmed her presence. He had lit the fuse, and in the quiet resolve of the woman cleaning up the mess at his feet, Julian Thorne felt the first, faint whisper of a coming storm. Alara's apartment was a small, sparsely furnished studio in Queens, a world away from the gilded cage of the Upper East Side. The rent was cheap, the view was a brick wall, and its anonymity was its greatest asset. One wall, however, was anything but sparse. It was a meticulously organized tapestry of a man's life, a testament to Alara's decade-long obsession. At the center was a photograph of Julian Thorne, his smile radiating a soulless corporate charm. Radiating out from his image were lines of red yarn connecting him to a web of corporate structures, offshore accounts, board members, political allies, and personal weaknesses. It was a map of his empire. And every night, Alara studied it, searching for a crack in the foundation. Her life was a study in disciplined austerity. She worked 3 jobs: the high-end catering gig for access, a morning shift as a barista for steady cash, and freelance translation work late at night to keep her mind sharp and pay for the tools of her trade. Every dollar not spent on rent or her father's ongoing medical care went into this singular mission. The mission had a name, a mantra she repeated to herself in the darkest hours of the night: the Vance Protocol. It was a systematic plan for the complete and total dismantling of Julian Thorne. Her father, Robert Vance, now lived in a modest assisted living facility in upstate New York. The stroke had stolen much of his vitality, but not his spirit. On her weekly visits, they would sit by the window overlooking a small garden, and he would tell her stories of the buildings he had raised, of the pride he took in his work, his hands once strong enough to bend steel now trembling as he held a cup of tea. He never spoke of Thorne. The betrayal was a wound too deep to touch, but Alara saw it in his eyes, in the shadow that passed over his face whenever a news report mentioned the soaring success of Thorne Capital. For her father, she wanted justice. For herself, she wanted retribution. She was not alone in her quest. Her small circle of allies was forged in the fires of shared ideals and a common enemy. First was Anya Sharma, her best friend from their undergraduate days at Columbia. Anya was a digital phantom, a white-hat hacker with a ferocious intellect and a moral compass that pointed squarely at taking down bullies. She now worked for a top cybersecurity firm, a position that gave her access to tools and databases that were invaluable. "You're sure about this?" Anya's voice crackled over their encrypted video call, her face illuminated by the green glow of multiple monitors. "This guy isn't some Wall Street frat boy. He's a predator. He buries people." "He buried my family," Alara replied, her voice flat. "I'm just digging them out." She pointed her webcam at the wall. "I need you to look into Thorne's chief of staff, Cynthia Blackwood. She's his gatekeeper, his attack dog. I need to know everything about her." Her second ally was Marcus Cole. He was a ghost of a different sort, a ghost of Thorne Capital, a brilliant, idealistic young analyst. He had been recruited straight out of Wharton, only to be unceremoniously fired 6 months later for questioning the ethics of a particularly ruthless, hostile takeover. The experience had left him disillusioned and broke, but with an encyclopedic knowledge of Thorne's inner workings. They met in a dimly lit coffee shop in the West Village, a neutral ground far from their respective worlds. Marcus was nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "He has a file on everyone." "Alara," he whispered, stirring his untouched coffee. "A loyalty file. Blackmail. Leverage. It's how he keeps his board in line, how he silences his enemies. Cynthia Blackwood manages it. It's digital, stored on an air-gapped server in his penthouse." "An air-gapped server," Alara repeated, her mind already working. "So it's not connected to any network." "Exactly. Physically inaccessible unless you're in the room," Marcus confirmed. "He thinks it's untouchable." "Nothing is untouchable," Alara said, a flicker of cold fire in her eyes. The final piece of her infiltration was falling into place: the catering company she worked for. Elegance Events had just won the contract for Thorne's annual corporate retreat, a week-long affair at his private estate in the Hamptons. It was the opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to get inside the heart of the beast, to get into that penthouse. She spent a week preparing, poring over blueprints of the estate that Anya had acquired from the county records office. She studied the staff rosters, the security protocols, the delivery schedules. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a soldier, preparing for battle. The official start of her campaign began not with a bang, but with a quiet, unassuming email, using her carefully crafted resume under the alias Elena Petrova, a name with no digital footprint, and a plausible backstory of working for European catering firms. She applied for a temporary supervisor position for the Hamptons retreat. Her fluency in Russian and French, noted on her resume, was the bait. Thorne had many Eastern European investors he liked to impress. 3 days later, the email she was waiting for arrived. Subject: offer of employment. Arrogance events. She had been selected. The inciting incident had occurred. She was in. As she read the confirmation, her gaze drifted to the picture of her father on her small desk. A photo from before the fall. He was smiling, standing proudly on the foundation of a community center he was building. A project that had been his dream. A dream Thorne had turned to dust. "I'm coming for him, Dad," she whispered to the photograph. "I'm going to take back everything he stole from us." Her war had begun. The Hamptons estate was less a house and more a monument to Thorne's ego. A sprawling glass and steel structure perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. It was a fortress of cold, minimalist luxury. For 5 days, Alara played the part of Elena Petrova, the efficient, multilingual event supervisor. She managed staff, coordinated with vendors, and moved through the lavish parties and high-stakes meetings with a quiet competence that drew no attention. She was a shadow, observing, listening, waiting. Her first real obstacle arrived in the form of Cynthia Blackwood. Thorne's chief of staff was a woman carved from ice, her movements precise, her eyes missing nothing. She moved through the estate with the proprietary air of a high priestess guarding a temple, her loyalty to Thorne absolute and terrifying. On the 3rd day of the retreat, Cynthia summoned Alara to the main study. The room was sterile, all chrome and black leather, dominated by a massive mahogany desk. Cynthia sat behind it, a thin file open before her. "Ms. Petrova," she began, her voice devoid of warmth, "there seems to be a slight discrepancy in your file." Alara's heart gave a single, hard thump, but her expression remained neutral. "Oh, I'm sure it's just a clerical error." "I'm sure it is," Cynthia said, her lips thinning into a bloodless line. "Your resume lists a reference from a catering firm in Geneva. Maison Dubois. I called them this morning. They have no record of your employment." This was the moment. The first test. Alara had anticipated it. Maison Dubois was real, but the reference she had listed was a ghost, a name and number Anya had created within their system, designed to be a dead end if checked casually. But Cynthia Blackwood was not casual. "That is strange," Alara said, feigning mild confusion. She tilted her head slightly. "Perhaps you spoke to a new hire. I worked primarily with the senior partner, Jean-Luc. He was an older gentleman. Perhaps he has retired." It was a calculated gamble, a piece of plausible fiction designed to buy time. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. She was a predator, sensing a weakness in her prey's story. "Perhaps," she said slowly. "I'll have my office run a more thorough check. We value security here, Ms. Petrova, especially with Mr. Thorne's caliber of guests." The threat was clear. Alara had until the end of the day, maybe less, before Cynthia's thorough check exposed the entire Petrova identity as a fabrication. She excused herself and walked calmly out of the study. Once out of sight, she moved quickly to a small staff bathroom, her hands shaking slightly. She pulled out a burner phone and sent Anya a single coded text, "Red flag, Geneva." The response came seconds later. "Buying you time. Stand by." Anya worked her magic from 1,000 miles away. Within minutes, she was deep inside the corporate servers of Maison Dubois, a company with laughably lax cybersecurity. She created a complete employee file for Elena Petrova, complete with glowing performance reviews, signed by the now retired Jean-Luc. She backdated everything. She even fabricated a small pension contribution. Then came the masterstroke. She found the email account of the junior HR manager Cynthia had likely spoken to and planted a small, elegant virus. Elegant. Back in the study, Cynthia Blackwood stared at her laptop, her brow furrowed in annoyance. Her attempt to access international employment databases was being met with a series of frustrating error messages. Her system was lagging, freezing. She slammed the laptop shut in frustration. The discrepancy could wait. There were more pressing matters to attend to. Ilara, meanwhile, was already moving to the next phase of her plan. She knew the location of Thorne's penthouse office within the estate. The room Marcus had described. The room that held the server. Access was impossible through conventional means. The door had a biometric scanner keyed only to Thorne and Blackwood. But the blueprints Anya had provided showed something else, a shared ventilation shaft connecting the office to a small, rarely used storage closet on the floor below. That evening, during the retreat's grand finale, a lavish dinner party under the stars, Ilara put her plan into motion. While the guests were distracted by a fireworks display, she slipped away, dressed in a dark maintenance uniform she had stashed earlier. She made her way to the floor below Thorne's office. The storage closet was unlocked, as she knew it would be. Inside, she worked quickly, using a set of specialized tools. She removed the vent cover. The shaft was narrow, claustrophobic, and thick with dust. It was a tight squeeze, but her years of disciplined living had kept her lean and strong. She pulled herself up into the darkness. A small flashlight clenched between her teeth. A custom-built device from Anya in her pocket. It was a compact data cloner, designed to copy the entire contents of a hard drive in minutes. The air in the shaft was stale and cold. The sound of her own breathing was deafening. After a few feet of wriggling through the darkness, she saw the slatted vent cover leading into Thorne's inner sanctum. The office was dark, illuminated only by the faint blue glow of the server's power light in the corner. She carefully removed the cover and dropped silently to the floor. The room was even colder than the study, the air still and heavy. It felt like a tomb. There, against the far wall, was the server tower, a sleek, black monolith. The air-gapped beast. She pulled out the data cloner and attached it to the server's main port. A small light on the device began to blink rapidly. It was working. The data was flowing. It would take 10 minutes. 10 minutes in the heart of the enemy's fortress. Every second stretched into an eternity. The distant sound of laughter from the party below felt like it was from another world. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. The desk was immaculate, a sterile surface of glass and steel. But on a small side table, something caught her eye. It was a single, silver-framed photograph. She moved closer. It wasn't a picture of Thorne with a politician or a supermodel. It was a faded, black and white photo of two men in hard hats, standing on a construction site, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, smiling. One was a younger, happier version of her father. The other was a man she didn't recognize. But he had Julian Thorne's eyes. A sudden sound from the hallway, the soft chime of the elevator arriving on this floor, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her. Someone was coming. The light on the cloner was still blinking. 2 more minutes. Footsteps approached the office door. Heavy, confident steps. Thorne's. Ilara's mind raced. There was no time to get back to the vent. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the heavy floor-to-ceiling curtains that covered the panoramic windows. She grabbed the cloner. The download was at 98%, 99%, complete, and yanked it free just as the biometric scanner on the door chirped. She dove behind the curtains, pressing herself flat against the cold glass, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The door hissed open. Julian Thorne walked in, followed by Cynthia Blackwood. "The fireworks were a nice touch," Thorne said, walking to his desk. The Japanese investors were impressed. "Of course, Julian," Cynthia replied. "Everything is proceeding according to plan." Ilara held her breath, not daring to move a muscle. She was trapped. Through a small gap in the curtains, she could see Thorne sitting down at his desk, his back to her. He seemed restless, agitated. "Did you handle the situation with the Vance girl?" he asked, his voice low and hard. Cynthia hesitated for a moment. The public humiliation was effective. She was dismissed from the catering company this morning. She won't be a problem. Thorne swiveled in his chair, his face a mask of cold fury. "It's not enough. I saw her eyes. She's not broken. Not yet." He stood up and began to pace, his movements like a caged panther. "I want her watched. I want to know where she lives, who she talks to. I want to know every miserable detail of her pathetic life. This isn't over. Not until she understands that the Vances will always be beneath my heel." Behind the curtain, Ilara clutched the data cloner to her chest, the hard drive warm against her skin. It was the key to his destruction, the digital record of every crime and every betrayal. Thorne thought he was hunting her. He had no idea that the prey was already inside his walls, and she was far from broken. She was just beginning. The weeks that followed were a tense game of cat and mouse. Ilara, aware she was being watched, became a ghost in her own life. She varied her routes to work, used public computers at the library to communicate with Anya, and lived with a heightened sense of awareness that turned every stranger's glance into a potential threat. Thorne's surveillance was clumsy, brutish. She spotted the black town cars parked down the street, the same generic-looking men in ill-fitting suits who would appear in the coffee shops she frequented. It was a show of force, meant to intimidate and isolate her. It had the opposite effect. It fueled her resolve. Meanwhile, Anya worked tirelessly to decrypt the data from Thorne's server. It was a fortress of layered encryption, a digital labyrinth designed by a master paranoiac. But Anya was relentless. "It's like a Russian nesting doll of security protocols," Anya reported during one of their encrypted calls. "But I'm in. And it's worse than we imagined. This isn't just corporate raiding. This is racketeering, money laundering, offshore accounts in the Caymans. He's built an empire on fraud." The files contained irrefutable proof of how Thorne had systematically destroyed Vance Construction, using forged documents to create the illusion of default. But it also contained dozens of other files, each a blueprint for a different life he had ruined, a different company he had bled dry. He called them restructuring opportunities. Ilara called them trophies. Armed with this information, Ilara began to subtly undermine his operations. It was a campaign of 1,000 cuts, each one too small to be traced back to her, but collectively designed to create cracks in his empire. Working with Marcus, who understood the vulnerabilities in Thorne's portfolio, she started planting seeds of doubt. She used an anonymous encrypted email service to send a single, damning document from the server detailing a minor but clear SEC violation to a hungry young reporter at a financial blog. The story ran 2 days later. It was a small blip on the radar, but it caused a 2% dip in Thorne Capital's stock price and triggered a preliminary SEC inquiry. Thorne was furious. launching an internal witch hunt that turned his own executives against each other. Next, she targeted his social world. Thorne was a master of cultivating an image of a respectable philanthropist. Ilara learned he was the primary benefactor of a prestigious children's hospital, digging through the server data. She found the truth. Thorne was using the charity to launder money, donating inflated assets, and then writing them off for massive, fraudulent tax breaks. She leaked the documents, not to the press, but to a single, notoriously ethical board member of the hospital, an elderly woman with an unimpeachable reputation. The resulting internal audit caused Thorne to be quietly asked to step down as the primary benefactor, a humiliating social blow that rippled through the elite circles he dominated. Her most direct move was a tense, coded conversation at a gallery opening she managed to get into as a freelance translator for one of the artists. She knew Thorne would be there. She waited for a moment when he was holding court, then approached him under the guise of admiring a nearby painting. "It's a fascinating piece," she said, her voice calm and level, not looking at him. "A study in manufactured reality. It looks so solid from a distance, but when you get closer, you see the cracks in the canvas." Thorne turned, his eyes cold. He recognized her instantly. "I believe you were told to stay away from my events." "I'm not here for your event. I'm here for the art," she replied, finally meeting his gaze. Her smile was small, sharp, and utterly devoid of fear. "I find that the most interesting stories are the ones hidden beneath the surface, the stories of foundations built on unstable ground, like that old development project out in Westchester, the one that went bankrupt. So tragic." She saw it then, a flicker of genuine shock in his eyes, a hairline crack in his impenetrable facade. She had never mentioned the Westchester project. He thought that history was buried, forgotten by everyone but him. He had underestimated her. He had assumed her pain was her weakness. He was only now beginning to realize it was her weapon. Without another word, she turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd, leaving him standing there, the seeds of paranoia now firmly planted in his mind. He was no longer just dealing with a nuisance. He was dealing with someone who knew his secrets. The photograph from his office of her father and the other man haunted her. She described the man to Marcus, who didn't recognize him. It was a loose thread, a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. She sent a digitized copy of the photo to Anya. "Find out who he is," she commanded, "and find out everything you can about that Westchester project. The official story isn't the whole story. I can feel it." A few days later, Anya called, her voice tight with excitement. "I found him. Ilara. The man in the photo with your dad. His name is William Thorne." The name hit Ilara like a physical blow. Thorne. "Julian's father," Anya confirmed. "And that's not all. I dug into the Westchester project. It was a three-way partnership. Vance Construction, William Thorne's development company, and a third, silent partner. The official records from the bankruptcy are sealed, but I found some old town planning meeting minutes. They were building a massive community housing project. Low-income homes, a new library. It was Robert Vance's passion project. A library. Her father had always believed in the power of books, in giving every child a chance. "What happened?" Ilara asked, her throat dry. "That's where it gets strange," Anya said. "According to the news reports at the time, the project was a financial disaster due to gross mismanagement by your father. William Thorne's company was wiped out a week after the bankruptcy was announced. William, he took his own life. The narrative was that Robert Vance's incompetence destroyed his partner and led to his death." The pieces began to click into place. forming a picture far darker and more complex than simple greed. Julian wasn't just a corporate predator. He was a son who believed her father had destroyed his. This wasn't business. This was a vendetta. A twisted, generational blood feud where Julian had cast himself as the avenging angel. Alara walked to her wall of red yarn and stared at Julian Thorne's face. The game had changed. This was no longer just a fight for money or restitution. It was a battle for the truth. A battle for her father's name, for his very soul. Her mission, which had been cold and calculated, was now searingly personal. She had to not only destroy the empire Julian had built, but also unearth the lie upon which it was founded. And she had to do it before he destroyed what little she had left. Realizing he was under a systematic and knowledgeable attack, Julian Thorne retaliated with the full, terrifying force of his empire. The clumsy surveillance was replaced by a sophisticated and ruthless campaign designed to crush Alara and anyone associated with her. He was a cornered animal, and he was lashing out with deadly precision. His first target was Marcus, Thorne's internal security team, led by a former Mossad agent, traced the initial SEC leak back through a series of digital breadcrumbs to Marcus Cole's old access credentials, though Anya had routed the leak through multiple servers. The origin point was a ghost in Thorne's own machine. Within days, 2 detectives from the NYPD's Financial Crimes Unit showed up at Marcus's small apartment. They weren't there to ask questions about an old data breach. They were there to arrest him. Thorne had framed him, using his influence. He had planted evidence suggesting Marcus was the mastermind behind a multi-million-dollar insider trading scheme. The charges were serious. The evidence fabricated, but convincing. Marcus was facing years in federal prison. Alara watched the news report of his arrest on her laptop, her blood running cold. Marcus, pale and terrified, being led away in handcuffs. This was her fault. She had brought him into this, and now Thorne was destroying him. The second attack was aimed at Anya. A series of anonymous, highly detailed complaints were filed with the board of her cybersecurity firm, accusing her of using company resources for illegal activities. The complaints included technical data that only a sophisticated operative could have gathered, suggesting Thorne had moles everywhere. Anya was suspended pending an internal investigation, her career and reputation hanging by a thread. Thorne was sending a clear message: anyone who helped Alara would be burned. Alara felt the walls closing in. She was isolated, her allies neutralized. Thorne's power seemed limitless, his reach inescapable. He came for her last. It wasn't a direct assault. It was something far crueler. She received a call from the director of her father's assisted living facility. The facility had been bought out by a new holding company. The new owners were restructuring, and Mr. Vance's financial aid package, which made his stay possible, was being terminated. He had 30 days to vacate. Alara immediately knew who was behind it. Thorne hadn't just come for her. He had come for her father. He was threatening to take away the one thing she had fought so hard to protect: her father's safety and peace. She was in a corner, beaten and bloodied. For the first time, doubt began to creep in. The weight of what she had unleashed felt suffocating. Marcus was in jail. Anya's career was in ruins. Her father was about to be homeless. Was this worth it? Was her quest for justice worth the destruction of innocent lives? She sat in her small apartment, the wall of evidence and red yarn mocking her. She had been arrogant, believing she could take on a giant and win. Now, the giant was about to stomp her and everyone she cared about into dust. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over Anya's number, the words of surrender already forming on her lips. But then, her eyes landed on the picture of her father, not the broken man in the facility, but the strong, proud man from years ago, his face full of hope and integrity. She remembered his words, a piece of advice he had given her when she was a child, struggling with a schoolyard bully. You don't fight monsters by becoming one. Ilara, you fight them by being smarter. You find the truth, and you shine a light so bright on it that they have nowhere left to hide. The truth, the lie at the heart of the Thorne Empire, the story of William Thorne and Robert Vance. Her fear did not vanish, but it was overshadowed by a resurgence of cold, hard rage. Thorne had made a critical mistake by targeting her father. He had reminded her exactly why she had started this war. He thought he had pushed her into a corner. In reality, he had backed her against a wall of ammunition. She made 2 calls. The first was to a pro bono legal defense fund Anya had once told her about, giving them all the information she had on Marcus's case. The second was to Anya herself. He's come after my father, Ilara said, her voice devoid of panic, replaced by an icy calm. It's time. We're ending this. Now. What's the plan? Anya asked, her own voice tight with pressure. He thinks he's taken away my pieces on the chessboard, Ilara said, her eyes scanning the wall. No longer a map of her obsession, but a battlefield. But he's forgotten about the most powerful piece of all. What's that? The board itself. Ilara replied, the annual Thorne Capital shareholder meeting is next week, at the Lincoln Center. It's his coronation. Broadcast live on every financial network. It's the perfect stage. She had one shot left. All the data from the server. All the secrets. All the lies. She would not leak it. She would detonate it. She would turn his greatest moment of triumph into his public execution. The risk was absolute. If she failed, she would not only lose, but she would take everyone down with her. But there was no other choice. Thorne had left her with nothing to lose, and in doing so, had made her more dangerous than ever. The David Geffen Hall at Lincoln Center was a cathedral of modern capitalism. Sunlight streamed through the vast glass facade, illuminating the sea of dark suits and the palpable buzz of anticipation. Today was Julian Thorne's ascension. The annual shareholder meeting was a formality. The numbers were spectacular. The board was loyal, and the keynote address, titled A Legacy of Trust, was set to be broadcast live, cementing his image as a visionary, an untouchable titan of finance. Ilara moved through the security checkpoint with the practiced ease of a seasoned professional. Her alias for the day was Sarah Jenkins, a junior AV technician with the event production company. Her credentials, flawlessly forged by Anya, beeped green. She wore a simple black uniform and carried a tool bag. Inside, beneath a layer of cables and microphones, was a laptop containing the sum of Julian Thorne's sins. Her objective was the control booth overlooking the main stage. It was the nerve center of the entire production, controlling the massive LED screens behind the podium, the audio feeds, and the live broadcast signal. Anya had spent the last 48 hours in a digital frenzy, creating a backdoor into the production company's network, a hidden pathway that would allow Ilara to override the system at the critical moment. As Ilara set up in the booth, she could see Thorne on stage, schmoozing with board members, his confidence radiating like a physical force. He caught sight of the technicians in the booth, his gaze sweeping over them without a flicker of recognition. To him, she was just another faceless part of the machinery of his success. The meeting began. The CFO droned on about quarterly earnings. The COO spoke of strategic growth. Ilara's heart pounded a steady, powerful rhythm. This was it. The culmination of years of planning, of sacrifice, of rage honed to a razor's edge. Finally, the moment arrived. The chairman of the board stepped to the podium. And now, it is my distinct honor to introduce a man whose vision has not only redefined our company, but has set a new standard for ethical leadership in our industry. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of Thorn Capital, Mr. Julian Thorn. Thorn walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. He smiled, basking in the adoration, the camera feeds broadcasting his triumphant face to millions. He approached the podium, arranged his notes, and took a sip of water. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Legacy, trust. These are not just words to us at Thorn Capital. They are the foundation upon which we have built everything." In the control booth, Elara slid a USB drive into her laptop. A single command line blinked on the screen. "Execute Vance Protocol. XA." She took a deep breath and pressed enter. On the massive screen behind Thorn, the Thorn Capital logo dissolved. It was replaced by a single, damning document, a forged loan agreement bearing Robert Vance's forged signature. The very document that had destroyed her family. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Thorn, oblivious, continued his speech. "Our commitment to our partners is absolute." The image on the screen changed again, now showing a complex web of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, lines tracing millions of dollars laundered from the Vance construction bankruptcy. Thorn finally sensed the shift in the room. The applause had died. People were staring, whispering, pointing at the screen behind him. He turned. His smile froze on his face. The color drained from his cheeks as he saw the evidence of his original sin displayed for the entire world. "There appears to be a technical difficulty," he stammered, his composure beginning to crack. "There is no difficulty. Julian." Elara's voice, clear and cold, echoed through the auditorium's sound system. She had patched her microphone into the main feed. "This is a clarification." Every head in the room swiveled towards the control booth. Thorn stared up at the glass, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury as he saw her, the Vance girl. The screen shifted again, displaying a cascade of documents, emails, and secret recordings from the server, evidence of his racketeering, his fraudulent charity donations, his blackmail files on his own board members. Each slide was a nail in his coffin. For 20 years, Elara's voice continued, a calm, dispassionate narrator of his downfall. Julian Thorn has built an empire on lies, on theft, and on the ruins of good people's lives. He calls it business. The law calls it fraud. Panic erupted. Board members were on their feet, shouting. Reporters in the press section were scrambling, filing frantic updates, on screens flanking the stage. The live feed of financial news networks showed Thorn Capital's stock price in a vertical, catastrophic plummet. Thorn grabbed the microphone. "This is slander lies from a disgruntled former employee security. Remove her." But it was too late. Elara had saved her final piece of evidence. The ace in the hole. "He did all of this," he claims, "to avenge his father." "William Thorn," Elara said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "He created a narrative that my father, Robert Vance, destroyed his... But here is the real legacy, the real truth." A new file opened on the screen. It was a scanned document, a ledger, hidden deep in a subfolder on the server labeled Family. It was William Thorn's personal ledger. It detailed, in his own handwriting, how he had been embezzling money from the Westchester project. It showed that Robert Vance had discovered the theft and was about to expose him. But as Elara prepared to display the final page, a page containing a confession from Julian about covering it all up, she saw something else for the first time. The decryption on this final file had only just completed. The ledger also detailed the involvement of the third, silent partner in the project. His name was David Chen. He had, at William Thorne's request, unknowingly co-signed a single, fraudulent materials invoice at the very beginning of the project, an act he likely thought was a minor, harmless favor. David Chen, the same David Chen who, years later, had started a philanthropic foundation that had provided the grant that paid for her father's first year of medical care after the stroke. A good man, a respected man, whose entire life's work was built on atonement for a past he didn't even fully understand. This was the final twist, the moral complication. She could reveal the entire ledger, exonerating her father completely and exposing the full depth of the Thornes' deceit. But it would destroy David Chen, an innocent man who had shown her family kindness when they had nothing. It would be total victory, but it would come at the cost of collateral damage. It would make her as ruthless as Thorne. In that split second, with the world watching, Ilara made her choice. Her father's words echoed in her mind. You don't fight monsters by becoming one. Her plan had been for retribution, but her character demanded justice. She didn't show the full ledger. Instead, she displayed only the pages detailing Julian's own crimes, the forged documents he had created after his father's death to frame Robert Vance. The money laundering, the obstruction of justice. The evidence was overwhelming, more than enough to put him away for life. It convicted him of his sins, not his father's. As security guards, now joined by two plainclothes NYPD officers, began to move towards the stage, Ilara made one final, private move. She switched the audio feed to a short-range frequency, broadcasting only to the single earpiece she knew Thorne was wearing. I know the truth about your father. Julian, she whispered, her voice for his ears alone. I know he was the thief. I know his death wasn't a tragedy of a ruined man, but the desperate act of a coward about to be caught. I know you've spent your entire life building a monument on top of a lie to protect his memory. On the stage, Thorne froze. The public humiliation was one thing. This was something else. This was the utter destruction of his entire identity. The private reason for his life's work. The knowledge that she knew, and that she had chosen to spare his father's pathetic legacy from public view, was a deeper, more profound defeat than any prison sentence. It was not mercy. It was a final, devastating assertion of her power over him. As the officers reached him, Julian Thorne looked up at the control booth, at the woman who had so systematically and surgically dismantled him. His face was no longer a mask of rage, but of hollow, empty ruin. He had been beaten, not just in business, but in a battle for the very truth of his existence. The legacy he had fought to build and the one he had tried to protect were both gone, turned to ash by the quiet, controlled fire of Ilara Vance. The aftermath was a maelstrom. Julian Thorne's arrest on the stage of the Lincoln Center became the lead story on every news network in the world. The image of the powerful CEO, his face a mask of shock and ruin, being led away in handcuffs was played on a loop. Thorne Capital ceased to exist by the end of the day, its stock worthless, its assets frozen, its name a synonym for corporate malfeasance. The chaos of the climax gave way to the quiet, methodical work of the falling action. Ilara, having slipped out of the venue amidst the pandemonium, immediately set the next phase of her plan into motion. She anonymously forwarded a complete, unredacted copy of the evidence against Marcus Cole's frame-up to the district attorney's office, along with a detailed explanation of how it was fabricated by Thorne. Within 48 hours, all charges against Marcus were dropped. He walked out of Rikers Island a free man, blinking in the sunlight, his name cleared. Her next meeting was with David Chen. She met him in a quiet park, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. He was an older man with kind eyes, filled with a deep, weary sadness. He had seen the news, of course, but he didn't know the full story. The documents I presented, they didn't tell the whole truth, Elara began, her voice gentle. She explained everything: William Thorne's embezzlement, his father's discovery of it, and Chen's own unwitting part in the initial fraud. He listened without interruption, his face growing paler with each word. When she finished, he simply nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. I always suspected something was wrong. He whispered. William was a friend, but he was desperate. I signed that paper. I never should have. He looked at Elara, his eyes filled with a profound gratitude. You could have destroyed me. My foundation. The work of the last 20 years. Why didn't you? Because my father taught me that rebuilding is more important than tearing things down, Elara said. Your foundation helped my family when we had nothing. That is your true legacy. Mr. Chen, not a mistake you made 20 years ago. It was an act of grace, a closing of a circle that offered healing instead of more destruction. Finally, she went to see her father. The news of Thorne's downfall had already reached the assisted living facility. She found Robert Vance sitting in his favorite chair by the window, watching the news report on a small television. For the first time in years, the shadow in his eyes was gone. They're saying your name, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Robert Vance. They're saying you were framed, that you were an honest man. You are an honest man, Dad, Elara said, taking his trembling hand in hers. She told him his name was cleared, his reputation restored. She didn't tell him about William Thorne's betrayal, or the ugly truth behind it all. That burden was hers to carry, not his. His victory was in his vindication. As she left, she handed the facility's director a cashier's check that would cover her father's care for the rest of his life. The first installment of the whistleblower reward from the SEC had been deposited that morning. The pieces of her life, and the lives Thorne had shattered, were slowly being put back together. The rage that had fueled her for so long was beginning to subside, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. The war was over. The justice she had fought for was not the scorched earth victory she had once envisioned, but something cleaner, more precise, and ultimately, more meaningful. Months later, on a crisp spring morning, Elara stood before a crowd of cheering families and local officials in the same Westchester neighborhood where the failed project had once been. The air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Behind her stood a beautiful, newly constructed building, sunlight glinting off its large windows. When my father, Robert Vance, first envisioned this project, she said, her voice clear and steady, he didn't just see a building. He saw a community. He saw a place where children could discover the world through books. She had used the remainder of the SEC reward and a substantial donation from the David Chen Foundation to finish what her father had started 2 decades ago. The sign above the entrance read, "The Vance Center for Community Literacy." It was not a monument to her revenge, but a testament to her father's enduring dream. It was an act of rebirth, of healing, of ending the cycle of destruction. As she cut the ceremonial ribbon and the doors opened to a flood of excited children, a courier in a crisp uniform approached her. He handed her a stiff, white envelope. The return address was a federal correctional institution. She walked away from the crowd, her heart steady, and opened the letter. She had expected a final threat, a pathetic plea, or a venomous diatribe, but it was none of those things. Inside was a single, faded photograph, bent at the corners. It showed 2 small children, no older than 5 or 6, laughing as they sat on a swing set at what looked like a company picnic. A little boy with Julian Thorne's eyes, and a little girl with her own. A forgotten moment from a life before the fall. A time when their fathers were partners and friends. She turned the photo over. Scrawled on the back in shaky handwriting were 2 words I remember. Alara stared at the image for a long moment. The ghost of a shared, innocent past flickering before her eyes. It was a final, desperate attempt at connection. A plea for a shared humanity he himself had destroyed. She felt a flicker of something not pity, not forgiveness, but a profound and final understanding of the tragedy of his wasted life. Then, without changing her calm expression, she walked over to a nearby trash can and let the photograph fall from her fingers. She turned back towards the library, towards the joyful sound of children discovering new worlds. She walked into the light, leaving the ghosts of the past behind her, finally and completely free.